Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here this evening to learn and talk about Oregon's corporate industrial forests, climate change, and a Green New Deal. We know this is a busy time for justice, forest, and climate advocacy work, so it means a lot to us that everyone was able to come and learn and discuss this proposal tonight. Tonight's webinar is a joint production of the Coast Range Association and the Sunrise Movement PDX Forests team. We are very excited and appreciative to be working with the Sunrise PDX guys. They've been awesome and really supportive. My name is Andrew, and I work with the Coast Range Association, and I'll be moderating the webinar tonight. First off, want to make sure we do a land acknowledgement. I'm talking to you today from the unceded Kalapuya lands. We want to take a moment to recognize that all of us here presenting tonight are on stolen land. Since time immemorial, this place has been inhabited and cared for by many different tribes, including in part the Multnomah, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, Tillamook, Siuslaw, Umpqua, and many more. It is important to acknowledge the history of white European colonialization of this place and the intentional destruction of cultural practices, land seizure, war, spread of disease, and countless more atrocities causing the genocide of this land's indigenous inhabitants and its continuation into today. As we are working on a Green New Deal, we recognize that indigenous communities have been disproportionately impacted by extreme extraction and climate violence. We know that we cannot achieve true climate justice without dismantling systems of settler colonialism and white supremacy. And we make a commitment to continue to learn about, listen to, and center the solutions already presented by indigenous communities. As we engage in this struggle for collective liberation, it is each of our responsibilities to disrupt and dismantle this colonialism beyond this land acknowledgement that I'm giving here today. Tonight, the Coast Range Association is being represented by our Executive Director, Chuck Willer, who will be presenting on our Climate in Oregon's Industrial Forests, a Green New Deal proposal, myself and Lacey Todd, who is our new Director of Climate and Forests. We're asking folks, if you want to learn more and get involved, to reach out to Lacey at coastrange.org. From Sunrise PDX, we have Matt and Sean from their forest team, and they will be presenting on their work and perspective on organizing around climate and industrial forests in Oregon. We will also hear from Anna Wemple, who is a forestry professional and deeply knowledgeable about the current on-the-ground conditions of working in the timber industry. If there is time, we're going to have a brief conversation between the panelists, and then we're going to dedicate as much time at the end of this conversation to answer audience questions. You can write your questions into the chat function or the Q&A, and we will track those and we'll read as many as we can to the panelists this evening. We ask that you please be respectful in the chat and don't abuse it. We will be moderating that. So thank you for using that chat function respectfully. We plan to end around 7 p.m. tonight. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on Coast Range Association's YouTube channel. We ask that you please share with your friends and family and networks. To stay engaged in this work and to learn more about future action items, read and download the proposal, join our newsletter, listen to our podcast, Coast Range Radio, or donate to support this effort, you can visit coastrange.org to learn more and volunteer. With the Sunrise Movement PDX, their website is sunrisepdx.org. And those are the logistics and the intros. And I really appreciate everyone for showing up, for being here. And now we're going to pass it off to Chuck to give the first presentation. It's all you, Chuck.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Let's see if that works. And let's see here. Slideshow from the beginning. You seeing that?
Yeah, looks good. Good
okay.
To go.
Well, my job is to do a brief overview of the proposal that we've developed, Climate in Oregon's Industrial Forest, a Green New Deal proposal. I'm going to provide context, dig into a little of it, but I'm going to go fast and I don't want to run over my time. So here we go. The The proposals for a discussion. That's a key thing to remember. The problem we're addressing is a dangerously warming climate. Real important to understand this proposal is how we processed on and were sensitive to the scale of the response needed. We relied on the policy framework of HR 109, the Green New Deal, House Resolution 109. And House Resolution 109 has a social grounding in just transition social equity. So as we developed this proposal, this kind of line of thinking influenced everything we researched and thought about and tried to solve in terms of a solution that we were seeking for the industrial forest lands relative to carbon sequestration. Everyone on here, I'm sure, is aware in terms of the scale of the problem we're facing. We're facing a potential global catastrophe. We mentioned in the document the statement by 11,000 scientists. This was their second warning letter. Both are referenced in the document with hot links if you have a PDF of the document. We take these very seriously. They informed and motivated us almost on the entire, all the elements we processed on. I wanted to note here real quick that going back to 1999, Coast Range produced a report called Forest at Work, a proposal for a new forestry dealing with the problem of investor-driven forestry. And we asked a simple question. The industry at that time was saying they grow forest to 45 years. We asked the question, what happens if you grow forest to 140 years? There's a long literature and history of the problem of why corporate owners, financial owners, business owners do not grow forests past 50 years, even though our study in 1999 demonstrated that you'd have more harvest per year, more income, more profit if you were a company. And that's what I had to work on for a number of years, the economics of why forests look the way they do out in the industrial estate, and the theme that you come across in the literature, in the forestry, capitalist considerations of return on equity don't work for forest, and it's the time value of money versus the ecological or growing time of real forest, particularly in the Pacific Northwest here. What we're talking about in our proposal are all the lands that are colored essentially red or purple in the map on the left. This is Western Oregon's land ownership map. Green and light green are public lands. If you look at this map, there's a couple of things that you can notice is that the gray area is land use for everything else. It's very small. The actual land that people could use in Western Oregon is, like living in Maryland. And I put a couple of red lines on that map that aren't in the original map. To the below that red line or to the east of that red line are the dry forest, and they have a different ecology, a different fire ecology than everything north. These maps are available on the Coast Range website. They're downloadable as big PDF posters, and they're really worth taking a look at. We distinguish between the Real Estate Investment Trust, Timber Investment Management Organization, Redlands, and the more traditional industrial lands that are connected to mills in some way. There's the landscape that we're addressing on the left there. It's actually the Millicoma Tree Farm, owned by Weyerhaeuser, where George Weyerhaeuser came down here in the 60s and announced that their 100-year rotation forestry regime on the big standing old growth they had acquired was going to be replaced by a fast-growing, shorter rotation regime, because it was around that time that the financial management of forests was ascendant and became dominant. And there was quite a bit of pushback by the local managers and such in Weyerhaeuser, Coos Bay at the time. Here's a slide that illustrates what this half of what this proposal is about. On the right are the current industrial lands. They have somewhere in the range of 113 tons of carbon per acre on them in live biomass, And on the left are the original forests that were here before the industrial owners took over, and they average 323, 300. So we have a huge carbon debt from the loss of the native forest that was on the industrial lands. And it's around maybe 600 million tons of carbon have gone into the atmosphere from this loss of forest. And the proposal is to recover and set on a trajectory, recovering the carbon on the industrial lands that the financial owners cannot do. This is right out of our proposal document. Since the 1980s, when forest owners, the corporate forest owners were integrated large companies with the workers working for the companies, many of them unionized. Today, what we have is a very lean, small corporate management company. They either own the forest or they manage the forest on behalf of investors, and then hundreds of contractors that actually do the work of hauling, logging, reforestation. And so this huge transition in the structure of forestry has exacerbated many social problems that always have been out in the woods, but now workers are isolated in small contractor organizations and deunionized. This has had a huge impact on the nature of work and how people are compensated, etc. It's real important to appreciate how this structure has evolved over the past 30 years. The other thing we were very sensitive to in this analysis, besides the pressure on workers in the timber industry and contractors, is the conditions out in the landscape. We accessed an analysis that looked at what they call asset limited, income constrained, and employed people. You've got people that live in poverty out in the rural landscape, just as you do in the city. But what's interesting about ALICE households is that they're basically people who are working, but they have hardly any assets, and it's paycheck to paycheck existence. And so the report looked at specific census districts areas for all the counties in Western Oregon. And these are some of the numbers that you see just in Tillamook County. And there's numbers for all the counties. But in Garibaldi CDP, which is a census designated place, Bayside, or I should say Garibaldi, you've got 57% of households that are either in poverty or living paycheck to paycheck. Idaville, 70%. Pacific City, 58%. Tillamook City, 55, Wheeler, 66. In the areas that have lower, I should say, not low, Hebo, 28%, Nehalem, 33. Those are all areas that are residential retirement areas for people from the more affluent metro areas. So when you really have a rural landscape that's dependent on the local organic economy, you have these high rates of people who are just living hand to mouth or in poverty. And this is a dramatic picture of the rural landscape that our proposal was sensitive to, as it should be, based on the Green New Deal's mandate for just transition. So this is the summary of the timber industry situation out on the industrial landscape. The real estate investment trust owners dominate the land. The reason they're REITs is because that allows them to pay no income tax as a company. The money goes right through to investors who then only pay at 15 to 20% capital gains. Low property taxes. $120 million a year less in taxes are being paid by the timber industry, the industrials, than in 1990 in constant dollars. Lost production, something we continually bring up about financial rotations, is that when you do a financial rotation, you lose 20 to 50% of saw timber production. The ecological damage, it's too numerous to even list in this or even talk about here. Many other groups do that and do it well. Damaged communities, depopulation, lost economies. Those depopulation is a theme in the Green New Deal to be sensitive to. And an exploited workforce, as I alluded to earlier, from this transition in the nature of work and the firms you work for. So these are Oregon's financial forests. Bottom line is the financial forest management grows dollars, not forests. And that is what the whole place is about under this new corporate regime, financial forestry. So the question is, where do the dollars go? It's not like they're giving the trees away. They're having some pretty significant sales, particularly today. If you've been in buying any lumber, they're making a killing. And so this is what these numbers here are really what I could say drive me nuts, is that this entire landscape, financially managed, generating a large surplus, a large basis of income. And I'm not just talking profits here. I'm talking payments to investors, bondholders, shareholders, owners, banks, the investor class that owns all this stuff. We do know that 60% of equities in the United States are owned by the top 1% richest households in the United States and 90% by the top 10%. In fact, these numbers are understated because we have whole swaths of forest here that are owned by billionaire families. All this is the generic equity ownership in the flow of money in the United States. All the while, the purpose and the cash flow off these lands going to the richest households in the United States, they engage in massive externalized cost to society and ecological damage, failure to pay proper taxes, etc., homelessness and other outcomes of poor public services. And so I think there's a fairly damning indictment of what Wall Street's colonization of Western Oregon is all about. The fact that it is lacking in carbon and then has this social condition, it resonated, all these facts resonated deeply with us when we read the Green New Deal. So bottom line is, and I've used this in many of my presentations, and I thought I might as well throw it in tonight, is that outside of Western Oregon and outside the forest issue, what we have in the United States now under this 40-year neoliberal regime that pretty much dominates everything in a deregulated system is you have a system at the top, owners of capital, basically vacuum cleaning the cash out of people's pockets in every which way they can think of, deunionization, whatever. And then what do they do with this massive amount of cash they have? They sell it back to people as debt, student debt, whatever, credit card debt. And it's a nice little system for the 1% at the top, but it's not working for 60, 70% of the people in this country. The other theme is that we We know about all these problems. We know about many of the themes that go on in the rural landscape or in the urban landscape. The scientists sent 11,000 letter warning us, the second warning, saying get ready. But for decades, literature in the United States and in the Western world and the movies have constantly played to dystopian themes. Science fiction has played the alien invasion. It's really all a metaphor about the invasion of capital and the destruction of communities. Whether it's Walmart destroying small towns across America, these themes are in front of us every day. And, this is nothing unusual that I'm speaking about. It just happens to be the way it's playing out on industrial forest. And we could do themes in healthcare, higher education, student debt. You could do an equal presentation of how the system isn't working. And all that goes to the heart of how the Green New Deal would change much more than just climate and the transformation of our energy systems. So let's talk about what we propose here. After much thinking and grappling and floundering, we see land reform and social benefit enterprise as the essential Green New Deal appropriate solution for the industrial forest lands. For one, only with a social benefit enterprise and pulling these lands out of C Corp or REIT or whatever, can we sequester atmospheric carbon. And by having social benefit enterprise, we have just and equitable solutions that are multifaceted and possible. And this is all tied to a close reading of the Green New Deal HR 109 document and other documents. Land reform is really the heart of what we need here. Land reform is a movement around the world. Interestingly, it's not much of a movement, if at all, in the United States. And there's a reason for that. And it has a lot to do with oil and gas, the power of oil and gas industries, and other powerful industrial elites. We came across an article published in Dissent magazine, Levi Van Zandt, fall 2019, titled Land Reform and the Green New Deal. Few Green New Deal proposals include explicit attention to rural people and places. This is a criticism of the Green New Deal we've seen in other places. And Van Sant says, build solidarity with global climate justice and food sovereignty movements, such as La Via Campesina. A bold vision for rural America can build broader support for the Green New Deal and challenge the ascendance of right-wing populism. We see our proposal as an answer to timber unity. And the words that really matter in that sentence is it has to be a bold vision. This can't be milquetoast. It has to scale to the climate emergency, and it has to deal with real material conditions out in the landscape. And an interesting element in this article is the first National Conference on Land Reform held in San Francisco in April of 1973. There is a whole history of stillborn land reform movements in the United States that we need to further investigate and know our history much better. Perhaps that's a report for another moment. So then we saw that because of the nature of industrial forest firms, corporate financial firms, and the problem with growing larger forests, obviously we thought, well, we have to put them in some sort of social benefit enterprise entity. There's a lot of, we kind of bounced around like a ping pong ball on a lot of ideas and things. And then the idea hit. I lived on the coast. I still have property on the coast, and I got my telephone service from a telephone co-op, Pioneer Co-op. And I remember, yeah, of course, most people in the rural areas in Western Oregon and in the United States buy their electricity from electric co-ops. And co-ops actually are all over the rural landscape. And this is a little report from Oregon, actually, in 2012. Last year, they probably had the money to do these kinds of reports, is that uh, co-op utility, electric co-ops service over 200,000 households and businesses out in the rural lands. And municipal owned utilities are quite substantial. Eugene, eWeb down there. And people's utility districts, another municipal type utility set up during the New Deal, services all the coastal counties. So we have quite an extensive uh, public benefit enterprises servicing the electric power and telephone grids out in the rural landscape. Portland, Salem, Corvallis, they are investor-owned utilities. And in the 2012 report by the state, it noted that investor-owned utilities pay 20 to customers more for electricity. It struck me that, here's the model, came out of the New Deal era, and it's perfectly amenable to new forms of ownership of land in the Green New Deal era that we need to have. We explored this, transferring land to social benefit enterprise. This diagram on the right is actually, and if you read the document, there's quite a bit of exploration on how cash flows. And here's just our little diagram that could show how cash flows in a co-op or whatever. And you could have employee profit sharing, but what goes out to investors today and banks and bondholders and all this cash that flows out could be reinvested also in building up the carbon in the forest, advancing rotation, and yet we could still keep whole the workforce. And under a Green New Deal and a jobs guarantee, we could probably increase the workforce outside of just the cash flow of the social benefit forest land owning entity. And it all made sense. It seemed we've thought about it. We've run some numbers. We've looked at things in various lights. This seems to be a proposal that's worth considering. And who would use these models? Well, we see tribal land restoration as certainly a huge component of any land reform in Western Oregon. Small landowner restoration. There's been somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million acres of small landowner holdings absorbed by the industrials since the 1960s. Every time you lose a small household out in the landscape in a rural valley, maybe you're losing a small farming operation, you're losing someone who's productive. And that depopulates the rural landscape. Depopulation, deindustrialization, industrialization. These are all frontline community themes in HR 109. Worker and community co-ops, obviously, are what this model would look like, but you could have municipal ownerships too. Many municipalities out there own their catchments for their drinking water, but many don't. And we could see Green New Deal financing assisting municipalities in buying key catchments and watersheds for drinking water quality. And there is the need for some conservancy restoration in crucial areas around Western Oregon that perhaps some of what we're proposing would be land purchase grants tied to working forest conservation easements. It's the working forest conservation easement that would set the tone of how much carbon buildup and how forest management would go forward. That would be your guarantee. So our next steps are is to appreciate this is a proposal for discussion. We're sharing it, we're consulting, we're listening. And so that's the first thing. We'll have some further research, particularly as we dig deeper into land reform, its history, its problems in the United States, and social benefit enterprise, some further analysis on that. And then we'll change and adapt. Secondly, we'll build a Green New Deal and Forest Grassroots Network. A lot of people have expressed support and enthusiasm for the ideas contained in this. And I'll just note Sunrise Movement Principle for Action number 10. We unite with other movements for change to abolish or reimagine institutions that degrade our communities and our climate. Notice the level of charge there. Abolish or reimagine institutions. This isn't pablum. This is not, the climate crisis is not calling for, we're going to make Weyerhaeuser better. It's calling for a change in the institutions because they are incapable of doing what needs to be done in a just and fair transition. And what can you do? I would strongly suggest downloading from coastrange.org, as Andrew indicated, the document. It's right there. It might not be an easy read, but hopefully it's a good read. And you can volunteer, sponsor, or support a local Green New Deal webinar like this one locally. If it was small enough, everyone could be on the screen and talking. And if you have any questions or want to get involved or anything, write Lacey at coastrange.org, throw questions, whatever. And thank you. I'm done. It's time for joy.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. Really appreciate that presentation. We are having a little bit of technical issues. I'm getting contact from folks who are unable to register, but we've got a good group of folks here. So we're going to keep moving forward. And next, we have folks from the Sunrise Movement PDX, Matt and Sean, to present on their work and their thoughts on this proposal.
Hey y'all, I'm Matt. I'm the co-captain of the Sunrise PDX Forestry team. Now I'm going to be touching on what aspects of this proposal jumped out to me in aligning with Sunrise PDX's overall goals and strategy, some more detail about carbon sequestration, and maybe also about the impact on wildfire, which has all been affecting us depending on the time. So for those of you who don't know, Sunrise Movement is a national movement to enact a Green New Deal, stop climate change, and create good jobs as a part of a just transition in the process, which Chuck already touched on. And in Oregon, an essential part of any Green New Deal we have here must take into account our forests, because our forests in the Pacific Northwest are special in their ability to capture and store and sequester carbon. Numerous studies have found that Pacific Northwest forests can store more carbon per acre than any other forest in the world. And one study by Beverly Law at the OSU College of Forestry found that protecting existing old-growth forests would equal to stopping 8 years of the region's emissions. But as we'll see, protecting existing old-growth forests is very important, does a lot. But we also need to follow the goals of this proposal and reforest and use the damaged private industrial forest lands to capture and sequester more of their carbon. And so in actuality, specifically forests of the Coast Range and forests of Western Oregon are amazing in their ability to capture and store carbon because of the wet climate, because of their closeness to the coast for a variety of scientific and ecological factors. But right now, that carbon sequestration capacity is completely sacrificed with the financial and with the Wall Street model of forestry. When we have the Wall Street ownership of these forests, and when it's controlled by TIMO and rate firms like Weyerhaeuser and Hancock, the only incentive is to profit. And that sacrifices all of the carbon sequestration capabilities that our forests could have instead. And because of the scale of the climate crisis and because of the scale of the variety of challenges facing us today, we need to think big and follow through with this potential for carbon sequestration. So when Andrew first shared this proposal to me, it really jumped out as something that Sunrise PDX and that I need to jump behind and help make happen because of the new and innovative ways it thought of our forests and moving beyond past incrementalist steps. Instead of being reactive to a timber sale, instead of a bad thing a timber company was doing, which is all extremely valuable tactics as well, it thought proactively about what do we need to happen to ensure that we have a livable future for all residents of this planet. And it thought big on the scale of the climate crisis. We are now at a point in 2021 where we don't have any time, we don't have any ability to sit back and continue with inaction and hope that moving slowly can protect our future and our future of all life on this earth, and which is why one proposal really jumped out to me as in its aspect of thinking big. And I'm 16, I'm in high school, and my whole life I've had the climate crisis looming over my head, imperiling my future, the possibilities of what I could do, and thoughts of what the world would be in 40 years, when I'm the age of maybe many people watching this webinar, of what that world would look like, really motivating in the sense of why this proposal is needed to transform the ownership and management models for our forests to protect that. And it's it's not a question of really what's political possibility, but it's a question of necessity, of what do we need to do to ensure that this world is inhabitable for my generation and future generations. And then a second aspect that really jumped out to me about this proposal as part of Sunrise Movement overall strategy was its focus on a just transition, which is the idea of as we switch over from a carbon intensive economy towards a much more sustainable and people-based economy, it's making sure that nobody gets left behind. The people who are employed in these polluting sectors and people negatively and disproportionately impacted by these by the impacts of these awful practices are not left behind, such as rural communities who have their watersheds polluted by extremely minimal stream buffers, or say poor neighborhoods, which have much more air pollution. And this proposal, it combines the necessary action on climate change with a just transition by ensuring that both the climate benefits and the people benefit, that rural people benefit, that we can enact and hope to restore some of the effects of colonialism and genocide on indigenous peoples, and that we can move forward with benefiting the people and the climate and taking away and restoring some of the harm that Wall Street and that has been done on both of those aspects. So I think that's my perspective on this, Sean. Do you want to, I think your turn to talk a bit, your take.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So I just want to start by thanking Chuck and Andrew for, the decade of intellectual and activist work that they've had to do to put this proposal together in a way that, is very compelling to anyone that sees it, that explains the issue in a way that is accessible and that brings together the kind of ideological divides of our society towards, in a proposal that takes care of people and takes care of our environment. I'm a permaculture practitioner by trade, but my training was in anthropology, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about the incentive structures that govern human behavior, right? And specifically, the two theories I studied in school were structural violence and root socioeconomic orientation. which, like I'll skip over structural violence. There is a form of structural violence here, but root socioeconomic orientation is just basically the theory that the underlying economic structure that we all are forced to interact in, i.e. capitalism, the profit motive, money market mechanics, is the main limiting factor in the possibilities of organization of our society. And when I first got this proposal, I saw immediately that it touches all the bases, right? The first thing that it does, obviously, is it accomplishes every single goal of the Green New Deal, which are the main Sunrise priorities. And it does that in a way that is very, very profound, in that it is rooted in a basic sociological understanding that the only way that we're going to deal with sustainability is not going to be through economics or like free market solutions. We have to subsidize sustainable behaviors, and we have to create environments where the communal management of lands sustainably is going to be possible. And so that obviously starts with just the funding, right? And there's a proposal here that puts, there's a good chance of getting that funding through this new momentum that we have with the Green New Deal. And then the other part of it is just like the technical capacity of what these different forestry groups could be doing. And, my permaculture education has showed me a lot of like variant and diverse strategies for how to, have productive economic models to, care for yourself, but to also, take care of the environment. And, just a basic example that I'm thinking of is that, a big problem with our forests is that the industrial forestry is all monocultures, and it's all tightly knit, and it's on closed cycles, shortcut cycles. Just by planting high profit species, small plantations of them in, these cooperative forest species like black walnut or, hybrid chestnut varieties, you could produce food for 20, 30, 50 years, and then you could cut for higher profits than you're going to be getting from just Douglas fir monocultures. And that's just one example of something that interests me with this cooperative model, but it encourages this capacity of people, right, of the rural people, marginalized people, to take control back of land, which has been monopolized by the basic underlying structure of our society. Money gives the people with the most money, the biggest corporations, the most power and the most control over land. And unless we subsidize the process of returning land back to people that are going to be engaging in these sustainability behaviors, there's really no incentive structure in our society that is going to get us there. So that's what really excited me about this proposal, just generally, is the possibilities for, diversity of management, right? But also, a proposal that's going to accomplish this diverse set of progressive goals that fits into this massive amount of momentum that we have with the Green New Deal. And, I'm really happy that we've been able to work with Chuck and Andrew and the Coast Range Association at Sunrise. And I'm looking forward to our future cooperation to get this proposal off the ground, to get it to our elected officials, and to build our grassroots base. So, thank you for having us, Chuck and Andrew. And I will pass to, is it Anna?
Awesome, Sean. Thank you for that. Thank you, Matt. Great work. Anna, you able to have, is your internet decent enough to share some thoughts?
Hi, yeah.
Great.
Well, I do have a spotty connection, so I apologize if I cut out. I'm on the sort of edges of service out here.
No problem.
But
We'll
I'm really
roll with it.
pleased to be. Okay. I'm really pleased to be here, and really thank you to the other panelists. Really inspiring. Matt, 16 years old. My son is 16, and we have these conversations about my children's future and my possible grandchildren's future. And this is of the utmost importance. And I also was very moved by the proposal and its scope. And it is super inspiring. A little bit about myself. I'm a reforestation contractor where I've been doing it for 25 years. And actually my parents and everybody in my life were planters as well, part of the Hodads cooperative. And so I have experience in the industry, but also in the world of that cooperative enterprise. And I think I was asked to be here to present just because I'm really like boots on the ground every day. I see the stuff, those pictures that Chuck was showing with the landslides and the just complete moonscape landscapes. Those are not those are not rare. That is what I'm seeing over thousands of acres dotted throughout the landscape. The monoculture cannot be understated. They are literally planting one species from a handful of mother trees across the landscape at 10 by 10, single age. To call that a forest is just a complete misnomer. Those are not forests. Those are absolute agricultural plantations. And inherent in that is a loss of biodiversity, a giant risk to loss of the forests, for lack of a better understanding, lack of the loss of the trees to disease and drought and any other kind of pressure that might be on it. So anyway, I guess my point is that the current practices are completely and totally unsustainable. One of the biggest issues I have with the way that they manage their forests is the monoculture and the 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 focus on destroying biodiversity. I mean, they go out there and they spray it with aerial spray herbicide to kill everything. And then they actually send human beings in with backpack sprayers to hack and spray any regrowth of hardwoods or any other kind of diversity that would compete for space and sunlight with their Doug fir. Anyway, I guess we all know how bad it is, but it's really bad. And I was excited by the proposal because I've always constantly thought that the only solution is to put these lands back in the hands of local people. Local people and small landowners are going to care more about the health of the forest and have more sort of resiliency and adaptation ability to manage the forest for more than just the dollar. They'll manage their forest for multiple use, for many different ecosystem services that the forest can provide. And they're going to actually enjoy visiting the forest. That's one of the things that I can't stand is I'm out there working all the time. And once a year, the owners come out and they stand on the landing in their fancy boots and they exclaim about how wonderful it is to see these trees planted. But I'm thinking these people don't know a thing, the first thing about what is happening on the land that they supposedly own. And that's coming from a company who's pretty local. Any of these companies that are being run by investors, they don't know, none of those investors have a clue of what is going on the land. And that to me is inconceivable. And putting the land back into local ownership is just the foundation of a new way of and a more responsible and sustainable forestry. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, and I don't want to go on too much, but I guess another aspect of the work that I do is right now I am a tree planting inspector, and I'm a private contractor, and it's just me and my boots and my shovel. And I go out with the crews that have been hired the contract crews that have been contracted to reforest or replant the clear cuts. And I've been doing that work for 10 years now. And every single crew that I have worked with are guest workers from mainly Mexico, but some from other Central American countries. And I do not disparage the men that I work with. I absolutely enjoy working with these crews. I've not had a terrible experience with them ever. It's just that to me, the model doesn't make sense to be bringing people thousands of miles up from a different country to do work that, and we're not talking people who are, I mean, I can't speak for them. Some may have aspirations to become citizens of this country, and hopefully they get that dream comes true for them. But many of these workers are only here for 6 to 9 months a year, and they come here, they work, they live in temporary housing, maybe motels or small apartments, many people to one room, and they work every day that they can, like 6 days a week. They just take as much work as they can, and they work. To me, again, what life is that? People should be living and working, they should be working where they live, and they should be enjoying their the ecosystem in their community. And not only are jobs being, not only are the local jobs here not being fulfilled by local people, but the people who are doing the work have to leave their communities to make money. The whole system just seems completely backwards. I think for this proposal to be successful, it would be really important to get buy-in from the contractors that are doing the work. I can just speak to it a little bit, that, like Chuck said, all of the labor on these industrial forest lands is done by contractors. All of the reforestation labor, as far as I can see, is done by guest workers from other countries. Much of the logging is done by local contractors who hire out a small crew. And many of the low wage and highly dangerous work is done again by guest workers from other countries. And then the tiny bit tier up and higher pay grade, barely higher pay grade, and machinery work is local people. But those contractors they're making a pretty good living. The owners of the companies are middle class. They pay their workers, again, not disparaging any of these people. These are all hardworking people who are doing the best to survive in our economy. The people who are actually on the ground doing the labor are low wage. And it's, to me, to watch, to see Chuck's diagrams of where the money is going is so maddening, because all that money could be paying higher wages. It could be paying local people to do work. And this work, there's this weird thing where everybody kind of thinks that this work is not worth doing. This work is wonderful work. The men who do it, although they're low paid, they have such dignity. They walk with pride because they know that they do good work. And I wish that for everybody in my community. I want people to be able to do good work, get paid a living wage for it, and be proud of themselves, and be feeling like they're giving back. And so again, like I said, I can talk forever and ever and ever, but this proposal is super exciting. Again, just like Matt said, because it addresses both climate issues and the power of forestry and forestry management to mitigate climate crisis. And it addresses the social issues that are just they have to be addressed. This idea of human beings being able to live and work in their communities and be paid a living wage and prosper and follow the American dream. Anyway, I would
Nice.
love to answer questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for coming straight off of work, that hard work, and taking the time to speak with us. So I think everyone can turn your cameras on. We're going to take questions. We have a lot of questions. We have about a half an hour left, and we'll get to as many as we can. But I don't think we'll be able to answer all of them. We'll do our best. Please reach out to us with your questions. Chuck and I, Lacey, we're all here to talk about this with folks who want to build this movement. This is not the end of this. So if we don't get to your question, please continue to communicate with us. So first, I want to just, we had some questions right off the bat early on, and this is probably a question for Chuck. Here's some folks talking about state we're in the current legislative cycle. There's people asking about state legislature, current bills, the current MOU between environmental groups and the timber industries. Can we just briefly, just not to ignore those questions because they're important things, but they are off topic in some ways to what we're talking about. Could you answer briefly some of those questions broadly?
We're not part of the MOU process, and I don't know anything more than what anyone else knows that follows it in the paper or whatever. What may be more germane to the themes that I talked about is a initiative in Salem to reinstate some of the timber harvest tax, severance tax, or whatever you want to call it, to get money into local government. This is part of the $130 million missing in today's taxation. There's various versions and ideas floating around in that. That's something to follow. We support reinstating some timber harvest tax. Then, there's a bill to neuter, so to speak, OFRI, the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, the propaganda shop funded by timber money and state sponsored that puts out propaganda commercials on how blue sky it is out there in the landscape. There needs to be a reform there. That institution's a little out of control. So those are three areas that are in play right now in terms of state regulation, intervention, taxation, or whatever. And as I say, we're not part of the MOU process. I think there's 11 groups and 11 timber companies, principal timber companies, principal enviro groups that are negotiating, basically trying to achieve a habitat conservation plan, a federal habitat conservation plan for Western Oregon, cell-modded species. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. We got a question here from Peter Stoll asking, how do we deal with the fact that Biden and his climate specialists are ignoring Green New Deal folks and putting together a broad range of plans, since he will likely pass something and will be continuing to be talking? Sorry, that continues on. Wondering if we'll need to alter the term Green New Deal. It's by Karen.
You want me to answer that?
I think it can be a conversation.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about Biden's operation right now. I do know that he's got John Kerry as point on climate. And John Kerry has been very clear that national mobilization is required. You don't have a national mobilization unless you have something like the Green New Deal. I don't know what the inner dynamics are, nor does it really matter. What I think is more important is to know what needs to happen, know the severity of the situation we're in, and engage our congressional delegation in an ongoing way, because they are window into Washington, DC.
I also think that, yes, the term Green New Deal has been very attacked and a lot of misleading information about it. But if you can get information out, true information about what a lot of these proposals are doing, such as this one, they have a lot of broad support because of the help they're actually giving to people. So it's a question of, I think, regardless of the term Green New Deal, but getting the truth out, especially to people who maybe work in the industry who are not happy with their bosses, but are wary of anything that they think could be aligned with a greener deal or something like that.
Great. Great. We're getting a lot of great questions. Thanks, everybody. Let's see here. Given the poverty and economic precariousness of rural life, how would the Green New Deal assure that forest co-ops and their committees managing forests will do the right thing? How does the baseline become determined? Would state or feds set the rules? What models from other countries can we look at? That's from Teresa Mueller.
Well, we don't in the proposal describe specific forest practices and specific management strategies. What we say is that the current depauperate landscape has a huge amount of growth that could occur, which means less frequent cutting year in and year out, and you build up forest structure. Now, within that framework, depending on the entity who is actually in charge versus a municipality versus a working forest co-op versus a tribe, in the document, we describe like a range of intensity of carbon buildup and how high intensity buildup would be more relevant to one kind of owning entity versus another. And so it's, we try and explain it in the document. It's a good question, but we didn't want to be prescriptive. We wanted to describe a strategy for wresting control, the need to wrest control of these lands, reset ownership, and have social benefit enterprise on them. This is all insured and guaranteed in the working forest conservation easement that would be attached to each parcel of land.
Did anyone want to add on to that? Okay. Was this proposal part of the listening sessions that were held around the state for an Oregon Green New Deal?
No.
I do think, though, it may be a good idea to try to connect and coordinate with existing work like those listening sessions going forward.
There's also the Forest Climate Alliance's Green New Deal working group that we are a part of, Pacific Northwest Forest Climate Alliance. What do you think about Oregon's forests enrolling in the California cap and trade system?
Cap and trade's addressed in, I believe, section 2 of the document. Strategies, we don't support it. The problem with cap and trade is you're creating revenue sources from polluters, and you're using it to buy the sequestration of carbon. Let's say you buy from Weyerhaeuser to not cut so much. Well, where does the money go? The money goes to the owners, investors, the 1%, because of reduced work and the absence of the jobs program of a Green New Deal. You have rural communities that lose workers. The 1% gets paid, so the corporation doesn't do bad. No, we're not buying on that one.
And cap and trade also can exacerbate like environmental justice issues where the pollution, which a lot of times happens in neighborhoods with more people of color or poorer people, can continue while the people, well, like, yeah. So pollution in neighborhoods where people of color, poorer people can continue while the benefits will be to more wealthier people oftentimes.
Great. I see this a couple times, and you kind of went into this, but it's like, how do we sell this proposal to the American people? We have someone here from Kentucky who's saying that the folks in Appalachia generally like their energy co-ops, but if you mention anything relating to the Green New Deal, they recoil.
Well, I don't bill myself as a salesperson. I'm more of an idea person trying to think of what makes sense relative to a fair and just transition, equitable transition, given the situation we're in and the framework of the Green New Deal. I think it's incumbent upon, and I think it really goes to how would this be implemented? It's implemented when the nation finally realizes the unrelenting onslaught of climate, its problems, is a clear and present danger and emergency. And at some moment, the political situation will snap, the spending will occur, the mobilization will occur. And when people start seeing the on the ground implementation, the current framework and the current narrative will be swept aside. And you know, it won't be easy. I would just say that the $1.9 trillion COVID bill that got passed on Wednesday, that is a per capita amount of money for the state of Oregon of $24 billion. Just the city of Portland, it's 4.6 billion into the city of Portland. Lincoln County would, on a per capita basis, would get 4.6 billion, 4.6 billion for the city of Portland, and 279 million in Lincoln County. These are numbers that sweep away a false narrative. When houses are being retrofit, when jobs are being created, when things are really happening and your local constituencies are mobilized to get things done. That's what happened in the New Deal. The reactionary forces were swept aside as people had real need on the one hand, and the federal New Deal program had real answers.
I would like to just make a brief comment about that subject, in that I think that my hope is that even though many of the contractors that are in this industry, you could meet on the street and feel completely opposed to their political position, and they would feel completely opposed to mine, for instance. I think we have to avoid thinking of them as the enemy. They're in the same boat. These contractors are not huge money makers. They're all part of that timber unity group and all of that. But when we're having the conversations with them, they're not the enemy. They're not the problem. And they need to be assured that under a Green New Deal proposal or this proposal, that they're going to still have their job. They're going to have it's going to help them also. This proposal, I think, would still have a place for contractors to do the labor and do the work, as well as the cooperative ownership and management. I think that there's a place for everybody, and rather than fight the locals who are doing the work, the contractors, even though they don't know that they agree, we need to just talk to them on the level of inclusiveness, and remember that we're all the people who are making less than $250,000, which is a lot to me, we're all in the same boat. We're not that top 1%, that top 10% that are actually exploiting all of us. So just remembering that even though the rhetoric is that we're politically opposed, it's not actually true. We are all politically in the same boat. That's my point.
Excellent point.
Yeah, and just to add to this, I spent some time on this just in my education, and the polarization in our society, it has become ideological, and it's based on, propaganda that is meant to bifurcate like the political wings of our cultures. This specific issue has, split our society on political lines based on, on the difference between conservation, right, and then jobs, right, economic opportunity. And I agree with Chuck that if you just explain the details, particularly the nature of this problem, Wall Street, big corporations, putting people first above big corporations and Wall Street, those things, they get to what we would call the political right. Like they are very, very receptive to the explanation, which is what's so unique about this proposal, is that it does describe the situation in an objective way, in those conditions that we all share, regardless of your politics, right? The objective causes of our problems are the same. They're sociologically rooted in disenfranchisement, right? And, dispossession at a systematic scale. And I think that just using what Chuck has put together here is enough to reach, people in the timber industry. And, speaking to, the difficulty in convincing people to engage in these practices, regenerative agriculture had a lot of the same learning curve. The cooperative model, sustainable food industry, it just took a couple decades for people to finally accept that it's a part of society and realize that it benefits them. And especially if you put the economic benefits up front and really explain the mathematics of it, some people on that side will get in right away because there's money to be made in sustainability, right? But it's just getting land to the people that engage in these practices is really the difficult thing, right? Because it costs too much money to buy enough land, right, to get into the game at any material level. But once those strategies are being implemented and the land ownership has been transferred, I really do think that there is a tidal wave of awareness that will take place when people start to see the benefits to them, to their environment, right, in terms of economics, but also, the landscape becomes more beautiful. And people just have a better situation. There's more security in your life, which matters, I think, more than anything for people to be willing to engage in this sustainability debate at all. So, I do think that, as long as we kind of follow the guidelines that have already been put out and just explain objective conditions and, step back from ideology, you don't need it to be the Green New Deal. If you're talking to people, you can just scratch it and, talk to them as people, and people will be receptive.
Nice. So we're getting some questions to the group about the nuts and bolts. How do we advocate for this on the federal level? Maybe go into a bit more detail about what this proposal is actually doing and changing. What people are interested and want to get active, what can they do? What can we help them with in advocating for this?
Well, we have a senator, Jeff Merkley, who was right at the rollout of the Green New Deal, and has got his fingers on the pulse of climate issues in Washington. The complexities that need to be unraveled, the reforestation workforce, H-2B workers, the racial division of the workforce, this creation of everything that now exists out there over the past 30 years under this financial extract all the wealth possible regime. It's working with your senators and your congressional delegation. How does this get implemented in a just way? It's not my responsibility to ensure this proposal rolls out and we don't have some racist script going on where whites are then set against the Hispanics or the Central Americans. This has to be finessed correctly with a sensitive understanding of the problematic history of this country, problematic history of Oregon, its grounding in racism, using race to divide people, divide workers so somebody can make more money. And that's where you have to sit down with your congressional delegation and a lot of smart people and a lot of input from all the parties, how to pull this off right. The money is not the problem. We saw that Wednesday. It's the politics, it's the culture. In a fair and just transition, we've got time to work that out in a way that it needs to be.
And in terms of one way the proposal could actually work, I think more logistically is one way I've heard it, Andrew talk about it, was, for example, a fund, say by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which gives people the ability to take money from that fund and purchase a section of land, and also gives the ability for tribes or indigenous people to access to that money as well to purchase back some of their ancestral lands. So it's giving, one way it could work is giving people the financial ability to complete one more land transfer following the many, many land transfers by these industrial timber giants. And following that purchase, be specific, as I think Chuck said, conservation forest grant easements or carbon sequestration easements, which basically, per the terms of the purchase or the loan, is you have to follow a certain amount of management and carbon sequestration.
The whole infrastructure in the federal government is all sitting there. The Forest Service has a whole division of service forestry that's supposed to be helping communities in terms of expertise. USDA, Rural Economic Development, they have shops. They're the people that actually hand out grants or make loans. It's all left over from the New Deal in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of the funding has been removed under the austerity of this neoliberal era we're in, but it's all sitting there. And again, it's not our burden to figure out how to get the federal government fine-tuned to implement the Green New Deal. It's the political leaders who have to do that. And if they can't do it, they have to be replaced.
Great. We're not going to get to all these questions. Everyone's asking really good questions. We'll continue this conversation. Please reach out to us individually, contact Lacey, join our newsletter. We're going to keep this going. We'll do more of these webinars. Someone's interested in how this can include tribal consultation, center indigenous leadership and visions for fire regeneration and land management, land back, the red and black deal, and other such possibilities in how we approach land reform.
What's the question?
How does this connect with those movements?
I agree.
Yeah, it's a body of ideas that will be shared with tribal councils, tribal staff of the tribes in Western Oregon, and a conversation will hopefully be had. I think we mentioned in the document, we really were hesitant to speak. I mean, we're not going to say anything about how the tribes ought to do anything, respond, or anything. It's up to them.
I also agree and echo that it is really important to have that focus and center those groups and try to repair some of the years of harm and damage from colonialism and genocide. And I think there's the potential for this proposal to be a mechanism for land back in giving tribes the monetary ability to buy back their ancestral lands and giving tribes the monetary ability to move beyond extractive industries that they oftentimes don't have the economic, that they don't have the economic options to do something else.
We're getting some pushback saying this is, lots of people are excited about this. We've got someone saying you will never, we're not talking in clear points we are making in this presentation. The organizing goals and focusing without being distracted is key to being focused.
What is that again?
So someone is saying we're not making clear points in this presentation and that our organizing goals are not focused.
Okay.
Is there a response?
I mean, I would say I think the goal to this proposal is land reform from Wall Street industrial forestry, which only has a profit motive, into locally owned and tribally owned forestry to address the climate crisis and to protect and center frontline communities in the climate change. And there's multiple ways that this proposal could make that happen logistically, but I think that's the goal. Hope that clears things up.
Yeah, I
Also,
think
yeah, sorry, Chuck, you can go.
read the document. You read the document, it's 50 pages. I think it's pretty clear in terms of the framing it sets up. Again, just as I started out in my presentation, a lot of what is spoken to in the document only makes sense in the context of a climate emergency, a national mobilization, and all hell breaking loose to solve the problem instead of us sleepwalking into disaster.
There's some questions about reaching out to Oregon and Washington tribes. We also have, folks talking about community managed forestry is being successfully implemented in Canada. The issue of land allocation is addressed by Parliament. Each of the communities has a unique expression of the model. Makes me think of how can this be broadened beyond just Oregon's industrial forests? How does this relate to other rural issues, other forest issues, and the connections there that we can make to broaden this movement?
Yeah, I dropped a comment in here. I'm trying to find it. Just I can address exactly what I said, but I'll just riff. So yeah, there are a ton of different strategies for how you could manage this land, and the techniques are pretty much they're developed. Like they know how to you do sustainable forestry that's going to be building topsoil, right, speeding up succession, create using diverse crops in order to make a profit. I think what's necessary is going to be the education, and that is something that will have to get worked out in this time frame as we're rolling this out. They're going to have to figure out how you're going to be providing free education on these issues to people that are going to be getting these grants, to at least make sure that they know possible avenues for sustainability. I don't think there are already legal regulations that can be strengthened for forestry management, but I don't necessarily think it's the place of this proposal to be mandating any of that. And I think Chuck is right for having not brought that up yet. That's stuff that we can bring up later. But if you're interested, whoever made that comment, just DM me right now, and I'll send you some links to some cool land management, sustainable forestry stuff. So
I see a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Question: can this proposal be sent to Oregon and Washington tribes? Well, of course it can, and it will be. Every tribal council member of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz will be mailed one of our beautiful hard copies, and tribal management. I mean, it will be sent with a cover letter And, I know some of the Siletz tribal people. I've worked with them in the past. Uh, I hope there'll be some response, but if there isn't, uh, what can I say? The tribes have their own way of doing things, has been my experience. And we will share this with all the tribal council members in Oregon.
And I think proposal it's a open document, and it's not owned by anyone in a sense, and so feedback is always ongoing.
Yeah.
And also, it should be said that it can't get much worse than the practices that we already have. You know, it'll be, it can't get worse. It can change and be different and be about the same, in the worst case scenario. But they're all, our current private forest lands are already managed in every single way to skirt every environmental regulation that they possibly can. So, this cooperative model will either be the same or better.
Last question, and then we'll do a little wrap up here. Is the Green New Deal enough? If not, what are other steps that we could follow it with?
Well, in terms of what I can do in a day, if we had a Green New Deal, it would keep me busy. whether it's enough, I don't know. That's I don't know enough for what. If you look at the goals of the House Resolution 109, someone asked, I saw in the comments, is this a bill? Where is it at? It's a House resolution. It's not a bill. And if you look at the credible academic penciling out of the cost to transform housing, to transform the energy system, to transform these other systems, and address the carbon sequestration need, because we're way over. We're talking spending $1.5 trillion just on climate. And when you start looking at $240 billion being spent, in a state like Oregon, that's a lot of, over time. 24 billion for the state, I believe, 10 years, $240 billion. If we had 1% of a 10-year Green New Deal expenditures in Oregon for carbon sequestration, we could really get somewhere in terms of forest land management, ownership, and a transition to a just and equitable landscape out there.
And if the Green New Deal is not enough, there's always more work and always more that can be done. It's hard to know what the future holds.
Boy, that's true.
All right. Well, with that, I want to give any final comments from our panelists. Thank you, everybody. Continue the conversation. We'll let you know what's happening. Reach out to us. Join Sunrise. Join our newsletter to stay involved, and we'll keep you connected with new and future action opportunities and continued work. Any last comments? Y'all?
I thank everybody who showed up and watched. Thank you very much.
All
I
right.
want to say thank you also. I just want to say thank you, and so glad that everybody, people like you all, especially you, Matt, are alive in this world and doing this work. I am just so impressed and really inspired. So let's keep working. Thank you so much.
All right. I think we're going to call it there. Thank you, everybody. Reach out to us. We look forward to continued collaboration and work, and have a really great rest of your evening. And we'll talk to you next time.
Bye now.